So, friends, this podcast started some years ago as a personal hobby. It has become a little more than that. Over the years of this podcast, I have basically done all of the work of the podcast by myself: show notes, recording, editing. But I'm grateful that I have a new partnership with Luke Clayton and the team at increasecreative.co. They are helping me to produce each new episode of this podcast. So, this will, I hope, help us to publish on a more regular basis on Mondays, and will up the game on the quality of this podcast. Luke and his team does great work. I'd love to commend them to you. You can look them up again at increasecreative.co or find more information on the show notes of this episode. Check them out. This is the On Preaching Podcast with H.B. Charles Jr., the podcast dedicated to helping you preach faithfully, clearly, and better. Good day, friends, and thank you for listening or watching this episode of the On Preaching Podcast. By the time you hear this, it will be the midst of what has been called Pastor's Appreciation Month, the month of October. And I just want to take a few moments in this episode to talk about the men who have been a pastor to me. Several men that God has used as shepherd leaders, mentors, and guides in my own life, faith, and ministry. Before I do that, let me take a moment to invite you to subscribe to the Cutting It Straight magazine. Like this podcast, the magazine is designed to help you to preach faithfully, clearly, and better. We have articles in each magazine issue on subjects related to the life of the preacher, the labor of the preacher, and the leadership of the preacher. And as well, there will be book reviews and other what we call toolkit stuff to help you in your own sermon preparation and or pastoral leadership. So the magazine is available both physically and digitally, and I invite you to subscribe at cutstraight.org to the Cutting It Straight magazine. When you go to that website, you'll also see featured there a new work that we are starting called the Institute of Biblical Preaching. This is a curriculum on sermon preparation from start to finish. It will consist of 12 video lessons that I will teach. They'll be about 25 to 30 minutes each, and they will cover every area of biblical preaching, from the life of the preacher to how to get your word work done in exegesis, to the crafting of the message, the writing of the manuscript, the internalizing of the sermon, and the actual delivery of that message. This course also will be given credits by the Luther Rice Seminary. So I encourage you to check it out. Sign up for the Institute of Biblical Preaching, and hey, pray for us in that endeavor. One more thing. As you listen to this episode of the podcast, recently, J. Alfred Smith Sr. has gone home to be with the Lord. That name may not mean anything to you, but it should. If you take preaching seriously, you should know the name of J. Alfred Smith. He was the longtime pastor of Allen Temple Baptist Church of San Francisco, California. It is right to call him a pastor theologian. He was friends with my father. I remember him preaching me at Allen Temple when I was just a little boy. I still have a copy of the book that he gave me that weekend, and it was on the history of the Black church. I read it just because J. Alfred Smith gave it to me. He also not only was a faithful pastor, a powerful preacher, he taught preaching for many years, and he was a prolific writer. So if you go to Amazon.com, you'll find various books that he wrote down through the years on various subjects of preaching and church leadership. In fact, I just have restarted his book entitled Preach On, a concise handbook on the elements of style in preaching. This book was published in 1984. I read it sometime in the late 80s as a kid, and I'm rereading it again and finding fresh reminders of effective communication that Dr. Smith has written about in this book. So I want to just challenge you to look up that name, J. Allen Smith, and learn more about this faithful man of God who has moved on to his final reward. So let's get down to business. When I started my pastoral ministry, I was just 17 years old, a senior in high school. You may already know those details. But without anyone telling me, just as soon as I became a pastor, I felt the burden that as a pastor, I still needed a pastor. I don't remember anyone telling me this or emphasizing this to me. I just felt that I had always had a pastor, and the fact that I was a pastor, in my mind, did not change that. I was a young man and a young Christian and a young preacher, and I felt like as a pastor, I needed a pastor to help lead and guide me as I led and guided the church I was called to serve. That was decades ago, but I still believe that it is good for a pastor to have a pastor. And over the years, God has placed a few men in my life who have been good pastors to me. And during this Pastor's Appreciation Month, I just want to mention several men who God used that way in my life. The first, I'm sure you may already guess, is my own father, H.B. Charles Sr., who pastored the Mount Sinai Baptist Church in Los Angeles for 4 decades before the Lord called him home to his final reward. My father was the pastor in whose home I grew up in, but he was also the pastor under whose preaching I was converted to saving faith in the Lord Jesus Christ. My father baptized me. My father licensed me for ministry. He was my first mentor. My father was a pastor's pastor. So on Mondays, there was the Baptist Ministers Conference in Los Angeles. He was a past president of it, but by the time I came along, my father did the weekly exposition of the Sunday school lesson. So most of the pastors had a weekly teachers meeting where they would prep their Sunday school teachers for the next Sunday's lesson. And on those Monday mornings, their week would start with my dad doing an exposition of the text for the coming Sunday school lesson. And I just remember how often men came to the study to seek my dad's advice, wisdom, and counsel. My father was a profound and effective preacher. He was not an expositor. His historical hero was Charles Spurgeon, so he was more of a textual preacher. He would preach one verse at a time. He would kind of lift it up as a gem and see aspects of the gospel. He kind of, in the spirit of Spurgeon, would call the text and make a beeline to the cross. He was a man of prayer. I don't actually really remember my dad teaching on prayer. I can't remember a sermon or a lesson, but the church I grew up in, under his influence, was a prayer saturated church. There was a weekly prayer meeting. At the end of his ministry, they started a daily early morning prayer meeting. Many of the meetings, significant time was spent in prayer. And really, that's in the prayer meeting is where he groomed the young preachers. If you had a call on your life, you would get a chance to do a devotional in the prayer meeting. And you didn't get any further than that until the deacons felt that you were ready after they had heard you in the prayer meeting. My father loved preachers. He invested in me. By the time I came along, he was at a place in his life where he kind of wasn't traveling as much. And I just, I got a chance to spend a lot of time with him. And I feel like I'm still learning from him after all these years. I'm an introvert, and I find a lot of strength in solitude. I love people, but I am prone to solitude. My dad just loved being with people. His personality was just the opposite. He never met a stranger, and everyone, it seemed like in my dad's life, thought they were his best friend. He poured into preachers. He was one of the most disciplined students. My mental images of my father, when I look back, I see him at his desk writing, or I see him in his favorite chair with a stack of books next to him, reading. And he encouraged me to read. He didn't want me to be, his word was a stereotype. He wanted me to be a preacher whose preaching can stand up anywhere. I just wanted to hoop. If you know, you know. And my dad did everything he could to discourage that. He did not want me to be a stereotype. He wanted my preaching to be able to stand up anywhere. And he pointed me toward reading and study and preparing myself to preach. He modeled it in his preaching. He loved his congregation. He worked a lot of times in the week throughout the week. He was doing a lot of community development stuff. He was in City Hall. I grew up with Tom Bradley as the mayor in Los Angeles, and they were friends, and he often took my dad's counsel. But I never heard my dad address politics in the pulpit. It was just Christ and him crucified. And he really had a burden for souls and all of those things. I feel like I am still benefiting from all these years later. I thank God for my first pastor, my father, H.B. Charles Sr. Then my father had a dear friend. His name was John Reed Jr. Every year, my dad would preach for his revival the week after Easter every year in Oklahoma City at the Fairview Missionary Baptist Church. And then he would come and preach the second week in June for a week. My dad called it homecoming services, and they were just dear friends. My dad loved to be around preachers, but boy, I never saw my dad, quote unquote, just let his hair down and just laugh in conversation like when he was around his dear friend, John Reed. He called him Buddy. And so the week my dad passed, he died the Saturday before Father's Day. And that week was the annual week that John Reed was at Mount Sinai in Los Angeles preaching. And the same week, I was preaching for Dr. Roy Allen at the Chapel Hill Baptist Church in Detroit, Michigan. So really, my dad died that Saturday as John Reed was flying from LA to Oklahoma City after he had preached at Sinai. And I was flying home from Detroit back home to Los Angeles after preaching at Chapel Hill. But he came right back after my dad's death and helped lead my father's funeral. And during that week, he told me, he was Uncle John to me, but he told me that week, I'm no longer Uncle John to you, I'm Pops. And whatever you need, I'm going to be there for you. And he kept that promise until the Lord called him home about a year ago. John Reed was the longtime pastor, over 50 years of the Fairview Baptist Church in Oklahoma City. He was a community leader. He was the president of the Baptist Ministers Union there, of the state convention. He was the leader of everything. He had massive influence there and did a great work over those many decades at Fairview Baptist Church. John Reed kind of picked up where my dad left off. And I can regularly hear him saying, son, make friends with books. They'll never leave you nor forsake you. He opened a lot of doors for me. Really, the meeting my father preached for him every year, he started using me in that spot. And really, the relationships that I developed as a very young man with some of the leading preachers in the country really started because of the doors that John Reed opened for me. And every period in life, not just during that time of my dad passing, but every major critical turning point in my life, he was there for me. He ordained me into the ministry. He came back and helped install me into the pastorate at Mount Sinai. He came back for several years and did that June meeting until one year. He just said to me and to the church publicly that I'm not, he says, I was the old man's evangelist, not Junior's. And it's time for Junior to find another evangelist. And I'll just, once a year, I'll come to town, and when I come to town, I preach, but he needs to find his own preachers to invite to this meeting. That was very gracious and humble thing for him to do. But he kept that part. Like, he would call me and say, son, I'm be in town on the third Sunday, and I'm come preach for Reggie at 8:00, and I'll preach for you at 11:00. He's the only preacher who invited himself to preach for me, and I was fine with that. He marked really another example of discipline and diligence in preparation for ministry, a love for the people of God, a care for the city that God had called him to. And his care for me continued when I left Los Angeles and came here to Jacksonville. He helped install me here. He challenged me to be disciplined and to be serious about the work of the ministry. He carried on the emphasis of prayer and its priority in my life and ministry after my father's passing. My first book is entitled, It Happens After Prayer. That is not my line. That is John Reed's line. And he was honored that I titled that book after his lifelong slogan. Thank God for John Reed Jr. The third person is when I was praying for a pastor. When like the prophet Samuel went to Jesse's house to find a king, and Jesse starts presenting to the prophet the boys that he thinks would be a good king. That's kind of how I was when I was praying for a pastor. I gave the Lord a list of 3 names and said, now you pick which one on the list should be my pastor. And the Lord brought someone in my life who was not on my list. I would have never expected that we would have any relationship. But God brought Melvin Von Wade Sr. into my life. He was the pastor of the Mount Moriah Missionary Baptist Church there in the city. And I thought it was important for me to have a pastor in the city that I submitted to, that I took counsel from, someone whose office I could just drive to if I needed something. And passed away into my life pretty suddenly, just out of nowhere. He invited me to preach. He had an annual New Year's Day service that he called the Prayer Bowl. And leading preachers from the city would preach. And it was an all-day event, and the church would be packed all day while the Rose Bowl was going on. In Pasadena, the Prayer Bowl was happening on Figueroa. And he preached me there. And it started our relationship. And at this point, our relationship has evolved. It started as passed away. Affectionately, I started calling him Pass. And at this point, I call him Dad. He's been a father to me and to my wife. During those early years of ministry, he was, please excuse a Godfather reference, he was a wartime consigliere in my life. And I started out my first pastorate with a wonderful honeymoon, but when it turned bad, it turned bad. And God placed Melvin Wade in my life, who was just there at quitting points to encourage me along the way, to encourage me to keep going. I stumbled over consecutive exposition, not in theory, but through the advice of Pastor Wade, who told me, you can't pick your text Sunday based upon what happened in Deacon's meeting on Monday. Just pick a book and work your way through the book. That's how I stumbled over consecutive exposition, by his influence. I as many times as I talked to him, I don't know if I can count a handful of times over 30 plus years that I have talked to him without him praying for me. Even it was just a brief, casual call. He also modeled disciplined preaching, disciplined studying. He's a man of prayer, man who loved this church that he served in Los Angeles for more than 40 years. Melvin Wade is the man who married Crystal and I, who has been a counselor and a mentor to us, he and his wife, over the years. He is the man that my children know as their grandfather or their poppy. And every step of the way, he's been there. He married me. He preached the last sermon, and at the end of my first pastorate, he preached my installation sermon here when I came to Jacksonville. And every point along the way, I have been able to minister with the confidence that Pastor Melvin Wade is covering me in believing prayer. And when I've needed wise counsel, he has been there, and he has been an example of just what it means to be faithful in season and out of season to the Lord's calling and work on his life. So I thank God for Melvin Von Wade Sr. The other person I'm going to mention, two more very quickly, is Maurice Watson, who is presently the pastor of the Second Baptist Church in Little Rock, Arkansas. I felt like I met him long before I met him as a young man. Everywhere I went to preach, and it felt like it didn't matter what city. I'd get in the preacher's car and he's playing tapes of Maurice Watson, and he became a hero of mine long before I met him. During those days, he was the pastor of the Salem Baptist Church in Omaha, Nebraska. And man, I feel like most of the tapes I had of him were of citywide revivals, large-scale events, and I never thought he would come to my church. And Jarvis Collier, who pastors in Kansas City, said, just reach out and call him. And I did. And he accepted the invitation. And not only really after John Reed, he became the regular evangelist at our quote unquote church revivals every year. And beyond that, he just kind of adopted me as a friend, but it just didn't work that way. I was not his peer. I am not his peer. And, he's, opened his arms to me as a friend, but he's been, more like a father figure, a shepherd, and a mentor to me. His, if you haven't heard Maurice Watson preach, you need to just go look up his preaching. He is at the head of the class of, prominent African American preachers. There's a lot of guys who get called these days Mr. Preacher, but that term uniquely refers to Maurice Watson. He is Mr. Preacher. He is preaching is faithful to the text. I was really challenged by his preaching for its clarity. He was not just faithful in the text, but listening to him made me want to be clear in my preaching. He's pastoral in his preaching. When I started getting the tapes from Salem Baptist Church, it wasn't the hooping and all of those things. He wasn't, quote unquote, trying to get the house. He was trying to build up his congregation. And that was a great example for me at a critical time. He's been a prayer partner for me. He's been there for critical counsel in desperate times and in times of transition. And he's a preacher's preacher. And there are many who consider him as a pastor because he's just pours himself into other preachers. And the Lord has just smiled on his preaching. He has followed the legends in several pastorates. He has led revitalizations in his pastorates. He's pastored several churches now. And his fingerprint is on each church because he's a model leader, a model shepherd, a model preacher, a model pastor. And I thank God for his friendship and for the example he has been to me down over the years. One more name quickly. I know this is kind of running a little long, but the last name I'll mention would probably be surprised if I added him to this list. But I feel I would be remiss if I didn't say that John MacArthur Jr. Was a pastor figure in my life, even though he would have never described our relationship that way. He had a tremendous impact on my philosophy of ministry, my commitment to expositional preaching, and the development of my doctrinal convictions long before I ever met him, when in a period I thought there's no chance I would ever meet this man. And then the Lord brought him into my life, and I got a chance to see up close, not just the lion in the pulpit, but the godly, humble man behind the scenes. And just counsel, advice, and friendship he extended have been a blessing in my life in ways that I would just not be able to describe. You probably know that John MacArthur was the longtime pastor of the Grace Community Church in Sun Valley, California, the prolific author and the featured speaker for the Grace to You radio program down through the years, who recently moved upstairs to his final reward. But there is a sense in which his ministry cast a shadow over mine by its influence, his faithfulness, his labor, and his preaching has had on me. Who are the men God has used in your life? You may be a pastor, but who has been a pastor to you? Shout them out in the comments if you're watching this on YouTube, or if you pick this up on social media, or if you want to contact us through the show notes here on hbcharlesjr.com. I'd love to receive whatever feedback you have, and hear some of the stories and some of the men that God has used. Nobody is from nowhere. We all stand on the shoulders of others who have gone before us. Thank God for those pastors. Thank God for their influence. Thank God for their faithfulness. Again, thanks for listening. You can find this podcast on whatever means or mechanism that you listen to podcasts. We're on each of those platforms. You can find show notes at hbcharlesjr.com. You can find me on X, Facebook, or Instagram. My handle is hbcharlesjr.com in all of those spaces. And you also can subscribe to this not only on whatever platform you use for podcast, but also the video of this podcast is available at Cutting It Straight site on YouTube. Look it all up. Take advantage of whatever resources you can find that we have shared. Thanks again for listening. And until the next time, all the best. You've been listening to the On Preaching Podcast. For more information or resources, or to contact me, go to www.hbcharlesjr.com.